Hey, welcome back to the Cruise Elite podcast. Tony, what's going on?
Good morning, Taylor. Good morning. I've got my Cruise Elite t-shirt on, although you can't tell.
Nice.
Because
full uniform.
It's out of frame, but yeah, I'm in uniform. Well, I need a hat. I need a Cruise Elite hat. I don't know who I have to talk to.
We've never had hats made. Maybe we should.
Maybe ask the dojo members, what new swag they're looking for.
Yep. What's new with you, man?
Did you guys just do an enrollment?
Yes. Yeah. Very, very successful. Really, really happy about it. We have about 63, I think it is, new incoming ninjas, if you will. And yeah, enrollment went great. Super excited group. We had done, so this particular enrollment was, I guess we would call it a private enrollment, meaning like it was all people that had put themselves on the wait list. And there was a lot of energy behind that. We could really sense that people were excited about the courses. And so we decided to do something that we haven't done before, where we made it just like a private enrollment. So if you were on the wait list, you heard from us, and we got a great group. It's just people that are really excited, very diverse group, which is nice. We've got doctors, therapists, massage therapists, PTs, physios, even some movement professionals in there, which is good.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really good group. It's gonna be fun.
That's super exciting. Congratulations to the class of 25.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. And a lot of these folks are already sure that they're going to take the Neuro Dojo too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're gonna do the foundations, and then the Neuro Dojo, our advanced course, happens in the fall. So we run another enrollment in August for that, and then that course starts in September. So
yeah,
a lot of good stuff coming.
That's awesome. Super exciting.
Yeah.
I also hear that word on the street is that you're moving.
Yes, I am sandwiched into my little space right here with boxes all around me. And it's funny, I've taken so much stuff off the walls, and I was like, oh no, because when I was talking to Alicia this morning, I was like yelling something, from this room into the kitchen, and I was hearing like this awful echo, and I was like, oh no, Tony's going to be upset about this sound, this sound issue. So hopefully it's not too bad. But yeah, we've been starting to dismantle the house little by little. So just unexpectedly, maybe a little more than a month ago, we got word that our landlord was not going to be renting our place anymore. So we were scrambling, but it all, like, the stars just aligned. It's been really difficult in our area to find rentals because we were looking at one point, and very difficult to find a good rental. And all of a sudden one fell out of the sky, and it's only like 5 minutes down the road. It's an upgrade in every way, shape, and form for us. So we're excited about that. And
man, that's great.
Yeah, really what we ended up doing was signing a lease for the start of June here. So technically we already are in it. We've been making some small trips over, and we're going to take the, at least most of the month to do the move, which is nice. We'll have an official moving day for like some of the bigger items, but we've been running carloads over there because it's so close. So that's nice and very important, because we still have to work from home. Still, we've got work from home. We got all this stuff planned. This was unexpected. So taking the month to do it is definitely going to be helpful.
Yeah. I've a couple times I've had that luxury where it's like I had access to the new place, and I had like a couple weeks or more of overlap. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the car trips make a huge difference.
Totally. Yeah. So it's good, man. I'm excited. The place is nice and new. We've got a great mountain view, right? Yeah. It's going to be, so there's a few things we haven't worked out yet, like, filming space and an area where I'm going to do a lot of my live teaching. Mm-hmm. We'll figure it out. It's the same amount of space that we have now, but the floor plan is totally different. And so we are kind of joining some things. Like, we're going to have a living room that is half gym, half living room. Whereas right now we have a small space for the gym, but even so, it's cold in our gym most of the year. So yeah, we're going to do a gym right in the living room, and that's fine with me. So yeah, we'll figure it out.
So, when I was living alone, I had a squat rack in my living room. But when I moved in with my girlfriend, I just kind of felt like that was a
Yep.
line I didn't want to cross. You know?
We are going to have a squat rack in our living room. So it'll be
Let's
basically
go.
my exact setup that we have now with the kettlebells and our squat rack. And yeah, we'll figure it out. So, and I might even be able to use that space for some filming, which will be nice if I can. So
yeah, for sure. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you. And we'll also have a dishwasher.
Oh, you don't have a dishwasher?
We don't have a dishwasher. And let me tell you, anyone out there listening who doesn't have a dishwasher, I know you can feel my pain, but like especially working from home and cooking every single meal here at home.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we have our daughter. Like by the end of the day, it's crazy what the kitchen looks like. And we invest hours into washing the dishes. And now all of a sudden, we're not going to have to do that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's a lot of time. Do you find it at all like meditative? Like some people enjoy washing dishes because like you can just turn your brain off and it's physical.
Not me.
With your hands.
Not me. I find it stressful because it's always a race. Doing dishes for me is like, oh my gosh, I got to get all this done so that the bedtime routine can go smoothly and it's not distracting. And so maybe earlier in life, doing dishes would have been more meditative. Maybe.
Yeah. Right on. Well, we've got a really interesting topic today.
Yes, we do.
And I think we're both sort of open to where the conversation will take us, right?
Yeah.
But in a previous episode, you had talked about inhibition tools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many times in physical fitness and movement, but also in applied neurology, you're trying to activate something. You're trying to connect a dot that isn't there. You're trying to clarify the map.
Right.
But in some cases, you're trying to remove inputs.
Yeah.
And that's where these inhibition tools come in.
Definitely.
So I want to let you kind of set the table for us and start the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. I'll start with a story because I feel like this topic is going to be a little bit harder for listeners to grasp at first without kind of providing some context. Because like you said, it is most popular in any kind of, fitness setting, therapy setting, rehab setting, whatever, to think about things as like always needing to activate. And that is something that we are doing a lot because really with applied neuro, we're always trying to figure out what might be an underperforming system. And then we try to use any kind of input that we come up with and direct those inputs to the said underperforming system to try to activate it. And that's a great way to approach things. But sometimes, because with applied neurology, we're applying a stimulus, and sometimes we have to turn a dial up and at the same time turn a dial down, because really with nervous system function, it's all about balance. So activation can be the right tool, and oftentimes it is the right tool, but there are instances where a person might be presenting with behavior or within their performance and their assessments, they might be presenting with what we might call overactivity with a specific system or structure. And so we need to be able to find those things and possibly use some of our tools in the toolbox to deal with that. Because when somebody is presenting with overactivity, it can really interfere with a lot of things, and it can make it difficult for some of the other things to work. So kind of beginning with a story here. This was probably, I think maybe like 2016-ish. I was doing a lot of in-person work. Alicia and I had an in-person studio in Massachusetts, and we were working primarily with clients one-on-one. And I kind of had a little bit of everybody in terms of clientele. I was still working a lot with the youth athletic population, something that I did for quite a few years. I really liked the age group. And I ended up meeting and working with a young boy. I think he was probably about 13 years old, and he was a lacrosse player in the local area, and he was really talented. Lacrosse is a big sport in the area that I grew up in, and there's a lot of lacrosse going on, a lot of off-season lacrosse, and if you are good at lacrosse, there's a lot of opportunities for you to play year-round. So see a lot of that there. And this kid was definitely talented. And so his parents brought him in. And, it's always tricky for me because initially people come to me, like in this case, for sport performance reasons and, maybe improving mobility, improving sport performance, general strength, right? And not everyone knows exactly what they're going to get when they show up.
Right.
Because we look at things so much differently. It's like, well, okay, you want strength, but we got to look at your brain too. So this kid was great, though. He was a sponge, very enjoyable to work with. And there were some very noticeable things going on with him when I first met him that stuck out to me immediately. And one of those things was what I look at is kind of an overactive visual system. This is interesting. You can have an overactive visual system, meaning that you're taking in so much visual information, it can become overwhelming for your nervous system. And this boy also had a lot of kind of nervous tics, I guess you would call it, kind of like twitching and sort of unwanted movement that he couldn't control. And I believe he was medicated for some of this because they were basically looking at it as like maybe ADHD, and he had a lot of trouble focusing in school. Intelligent guy, but hard time in school with learning because he had a lot of attention and focus issues because his visual system was doing so much all the time. And when you would speak to him, his eyes would dart around. He really could not hold his gaze on you. And they would just move around like crazy. And the same thing would happen when he was learning movements. So I'd be teaching him something and he would actually be talking to me without looking at me. And his eyes would be all over the place, kind of like the rest of his body. He had a lot of kind of twitching kind of going on, like in his shoulder area. Nothing like super drastic. Might even go unnoticed by kind of the untrained eye, but it was there. And even when I like watched him walk, I did some gait assessment with him. He had a lot of like nervous movement, right? Things that he just could not control. So these issues it was challenging for him to learn movement, even though he was a good mover. Like it's interesting. Once he understood something, he was quite good. And I remember one of the first things I taught him was juggling, right? Because juggling is an integrated skill that uses your visual system, your proprioception, and your vestibular system. It's a great way to start that age group on, vision type training. And for him, it was very specific to the types of things he wanted to do with his body as an athlete. So I remember teaching him juggling, and it was very hard at first, but then he got the hang of it, and I actually could see that his overactive visual system could help him in ways. Because you need to take in as much visual input as humanly possible if you want to be a good athlete. So got to know him, did several sessions with him. The way it kind of works with clients is the more you get to know them, the more history you learn about them. They tend to offer more history as they go along with you, and of course, as the coach, you're asking more questions. So we got into conversations about things that were difficult, and he was very clear that it was really hard academically and almost impossible for him to do his homework because by the time it was time to do homework towards the end of the day or into the evening, he was very fatigued and he didn't have the focus to sit down and do his homework. And so it was like a thing at home that caused a lot of stress. And he was explaining this. And so as I got to know him better, we got into a little bit of neuro. I started trying some different things, and I would use his gait as the assessment because within his gait, I saw a lot of cerebellar issues. I saw a lot of the unwanted movement. And then, of course, I saw his head and neck moving around a lot as well as his eyes. And so in my mind, I was like, well, I'm going to try some different things and see if we can tone down those types of things because he was essentially being distracted constantly by his own overactive visual system. He could not look at the same thing for more than 2 seconds. Like we call it gaze stabilization. It's a very important visual skill. Just being able to hold your eyes on something. So I used that as part of our assessment. And in my mind, I tried some different things. And I was like, I think we need to reach into our toolbox for inhibition tools because of all this overactivity. Some of the language we often use with this kind of overactivity is an overactive mesencephalon. And what that means is there may be some overactivity in the brainstem at the midbrain level, which is at the top of the brainstem. It's divided up into several different divisions. In this area at the top of the brainstem, called the midbrain, but also referred to as the mesencephalon, is an area that is very much involved in a lot of visual processing and auditory processing. And it is also the beginning of the sympathetic nervous system. So that's where a lot of sympathetics get generated. And if you have overactivity in that area, it's going to increase your sympathetic drive. And when your sympathetics increase, remember, this is fight or flight, right? A lot of people know this as fight or flight. When your fight or flight responses increase, it's difficult to do things well with stamina, right? Because adrenaline and like stress hormones will help you in the short term, but then you become kind of a victim to that hormonal cascade and all of the increased sympathetic responses, and it becomes hard to do things well for a long period of time. So when you get kind of stuck in that sympathetic drive, it works against you in a lot of ways, especially with attention and focus. And then, of course, even internal processes like digesting food, sleeping, recovering, right? There's a lot of issues that come up when we're stuck in that sympathetic drive. So I was looking at this young boy, as kind of the overactive mesencephalon. So one day he came in, we're doing some juggling, getting warmed up. And I was like, hey, we're going to try something. So I went and got one of my tackle boxes full of neuro tools. And I was like, I got some funny glasses for you to try on. And so I took out some glasses. I have a whole toolkit of specific glasses that are all different colors. And I also have glasses that are called Pinhole glasses that some people are familiar with. Pinhole glasses look like plastic frames, and they have plastic lenses that are not clear. Mm-hmm. They're actually solid plastic, but there's a bunch of little holes drilled in the lenses. Tons of them. Very, very small diameter, like you took a pin or a tack and you poked a hole in it. And so I had him try these glasses on. And it always is funny watching somebody put these on, because you put them on and it's all of a sudden like you're looking through the screen on a porch, and your eyes kind of take a moment to adjust. It's like you're looking at the holes on the lens, and then you're focusing to the distance and then back to the holes. And it's like you're back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa. And some people will be like, well, this is wild. Like, how am I able to see through this? And what I noticed with him when he put the glasses on was all of a sudden his posture changed. Instead of being tense looking in his neck and kind of, I guess it would be like a strong forward lean with a lot of tension, all of a sudden he relaxed for a moment. And I feel like I could even tell his breathing had calmed down. One of the things that happens with sympathetic drive when your sympathetics have been elevated for a long time, it can lead to hyperventilation. That's what was happening to him as well. So he put these glasses on, and I could tell right away something was different. I was like, hey, go for a walk with these on. And so I started looking at his gait, and it transformed him. He had less tension in his shoulders. All the nervous twitching that was going on was gone, and his head was stable. And I was like, wow. And he noticed it too.
Was he bobblehead?
He was bobblehead in a sense that his head was constantly reflexively moving because his eyes were, but he was not a bobblehead per se in relation to a stability problem in his neck.
Yep.
Yeah. So his was because of so much activity happening in that midbrain that Yeah, just his eyes were moving all over the place and his muscle tone was changing all the time because of that. So all of a sudden he was like a cool, collected, just things look totally different. And he was like, whoa. And he's just like, he took them off, he put them back on, he took them off, he's just kind of exploring it. And he's like, this feels different. So I noticed all that unwanted movement going away. And then we started training and doing things with these pinhole glasses on. And it was wild. Like all of a sudden, he could gaze stabilize. Like his visual system was able to focus on one thing instead of everything.
Mm-hmm.
He looked more energy efficient. He moved better. He moved with better coordination. And all that unwanted movement was gone. It was really a breakthrough. So we had a great session together and he thought it was super cool. And I said, hey, take these glasses home, work with them a little bit, see what practice your juggling, and do me a favor. When it comes time to do your homework, put these on. And so that's what he did. And he came back and I said, how'd you go with the homework with the glasses on? He was like, game changer. And I was like, really? That's excellent. He's like, yeah, absolutely. So I got to talk to my parents about getting these. And so that's how it went. And it was really cool to see that and to be able to hand them a very inexpensive tool and see how it could affect them on that level. Now, the story doesn't have an amazing ending because eventually I just stopped seeing this guy because he got, like every other kid in this area that I was working in, he got overbooked. Mm-hmm. Too many sports, too much specialization, brothers and sisters that also needed to be in different locations playing their sports and doing their things. And eventually just sort of fizzled out for us. But it was a neat experience. And it was really an amazing one to see how an inhibition tool, one idea, could change everything instantly. It's neat.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. Your working theory here is that those pinhole glasses were removing visual information.
Yeah. So the simple way to look at it is the pinhole glasses reduce light, right? So they think about it as like reducing the aperture, I guess you would say, like the amount of light coming in. And so that is like taking load off of the brain, right? It's taking load off of the brain. And it is doing some interesting things at the midbrain level too. All visual input does. It's one of those things where it's kind of a black box with the type of work that we do because it's like we don't have technology to say, okay, this is overactive, this is underactive, guaranteed. We have theory that in observation skills and assessments, they give us an idea for what might be going on, but we don't really know until we start to try things and assess them. So can we definitively say like, oh, this guy needed more mesencephalon activation or less? It's hard to say.
Right.
But putting these glasses on him reduced visual input, reduced light information, and took stress off of the visual system, allowing him to then focus on things better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because two other things come to mind. I wonder if it changed the field of view at all, like if it limits peripheral vision a little bit.
Yes, it seems to limit some peripheral vision, it's a part of it too.
Yeah.
It's not completely blinding peripheral vision, which, by the way, is another inhibition tool that we put
the blinders on.
Yep, and you can make your own. I'll talk in a few minutes, I'm sure, about making your own occlusion glasses. It does inhibit it, and that's a big part of it too, because sometimes when people are kind of expressing that overactivity of the visual system, I actually worked with a guy who was a veteran who had been like blown up in combat, and he was diagnosed with PTSD, and it was an incredible challenge to even find a single drill that would not set this guy's sympathetics off.
Yeah.
And one of the things we did during the session for him was he wore sunglasses, and we put tape on the outside of the glasses to take away his peripheral vision. So we were decreasing light with sunglasses, also decreasing peripheral vision to take load off his visual system because it was so hindering for his overall performance. So it's another style of an inhibition tool.
Yeah, and the result there was now you could do things and it didn't raise threat or didn't trigger sympathetic as much.
Yeah, and if you've never seen this before, it's crazy. I mean, and this is obviously a very intense situation. You don't see this often, but this poor guy could not do a single mobility drill without a negative ramification to it. Or he might be like able to do 3 reps and then the 4th rep would destroy him. And so it was always very difficult to predict what was going to happen. So we needed to reach into the toolbox for inhibition tools to down regulate all of that sympathetic drive that was happening constantly, which was quite useful. He ended up wearing sunglasses in more than just our sessions because it was useful for him in his everyday life to do that.
Yeah. Jeez. One more thing comes to mind with these Pinhole glasses that I wonder if there's something there. So you were saying that like he'd focus on the actual glasses, like the plane that's right in front of his eyes that has the holes in it, and then he'd kind of focus through those holes out into the world and back and forth. Is there like a convergence, like focus, like depth of field thing happening here?
Yeah, there probably is, and I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a lot happening that we don't even know about with this. It's interesting when you put these glasses on, you get very distracted by this feeling of like looking through a screen.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it goes away. It just goes away. And then if you really want to see it, you can kind of dilate your gaze in a way that then allows you to see it. But what happens is when you put pinholes on, after about a minute and a half of wearing them, it's as if you're not wearing them. And one of the interesting things that people will tell you is their acuity increases.
Yeah.
So like you could actually use pinhole glasses. I've done it before. Like at nighttime, I don't have my contact lenses in our home. But like, let's say I want to see the TV or something and I'm far away from the TV, like pinhole glasses will increase your acuity so much. It's wild.
Yeah. Cause it focuses the light through those little holes, right?
Exactly. So, yeah. It's like if you have an acuity issue, we like to squint. Right. What we're doing is like squinting and activating some other muscles, but also, decreasing that amount of light that can come in, and that it increases your acuity. It's interesting. So I mean, they can be. It's a tool that is probably more commonly used in vision rehab.
Yeah,
but man, has some really really interesting applications as an inhibition tool, as a sports performance tool. If you're looking to use vision training to improve visual acuity, it might be useful for that too. Yeah, it's neat. I've had chronic pain clients put these things on, and their pain goes from like a 9 to a 2. I mean, really, really neat. When you mess with the visual system, some really big things can happen immediately.
Yeah, so it sounds like the visual system is a really ripe avenue through which to use inhibition tools specifically.
Big time, because there's so much sensory information coming in through the eyes. I mean, it depends on what you read, but most people researching this agree around this idea that more than 70% of the sensory information that we're taking in from the outside world is coming in through the eyes. That's a lot. So, when you start messing with input, right, with the visual system, some things change. It's actually one of the first experiences I give people in some of our master classes, our free master classes that we do.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do to teach people about what I mean when I say input is I teach them the assess-reassess process with range of motion. And then I have them cover one eye. And I have them cover an eye for 15, 20 seconds. And then we do some retesting. And the chat box lights up with people, saying, oh, this was amazing, I got better. And then you get some people like, I didn't change. And then you get some other people, a few people, they're like, I actually got worse. Right. And it's a great way to teach people about what I mean when I say we're going to be playing with inputs.
Yeah.
Because covering one eye is going to change input drastically.
Yeah. So I ran through the replay of that.
Uh-huh.
And that was one where I was like, Wow, that really changed my range of motion.
Did it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is always, it's like we talk about it and I know intellectually what's going on. And then when you actually experience it, it's really something else. So
It
yeah.
is. And here's the thing, like performance is governed. Like this is just how it is. I mean,
Yeah.
you see this stuff happen over and over and over again. Your strength is governed, right? Your balance is governed. Your mobility is governed by the nervous system. So you are granted these things. And that's why you can have muscles that don't do as good of a job as they could. They can be big muscles, they can be strong muscles, but they don't do as good of a job as they could, right? You could have mobility issues that you swear are structural, right? It's like something's wrong, something's structural. And then you change the input and all of a sudden, no more mobility issue. And it's like, no. That doesn't mean it's necessarily structural. That was governed by your nervous system. Your emergency brakes were on. And once we lifted the emergency brakes, you now have access to what you didn't have access to before. That's how the nervous system is, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
Right? It's just bizarre.
But when you frame it thusly, it makes sense, right?
It does.
It's not something you would intuit, but it's something that you can understand.
Definitely.
So maybe zooming back out a little bit, what if we talk about a few more types of visual inhibitions, but then also open it up to other inhibition tools that you use in your practice, and we can kind of talk about those and pick them apart.
Yeah. So, I just mentioned covering one eye. That is actually an inhibition tool that we might use in training. It's not a perfect one because just covering one eye does not, well, you know what? Let me actually rewind for a second. We just did a podcast on the neurology of movement, right? Where we talked about the most important, loop or pathway when it comes to voluntary movement. We talked about the cortex, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. We talked about the communication back and forth between the cortex and the cerebellum to enact movement, right? And to coordinate that movement. We talked about the reflexive roles of the brainstem to help maintain our reflexive stabilization while we move and to help all of the autonomic functions that need to happen to support us while we move. So that'd be a good thing for our listeners to review. If you haven't heard that podcast yet, that would be a good one, because hopefully what people started to understand by listening to that podcast is that a lot of times it's all about figuring out which structures need activation, right? And a lot of our work with applied neuro becomes one-sided because what you typically see with people is that there is some kind of, I guess, what we would call hemispheric dominance. This is a term that some people agree on. Not everybody agrees on it, but like what we typically see, like as far as like the world of the scientists, is like this idea kind of goes in and out, in and out, in and out, but we always come back to it. It's like, and for me, like observationally, there's really no question in my mind that a human can be dominant with their function, meaning have a dominant hemisphere, have a dominant cerebellum, that kind of thing. Because that's what I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis with people, is helping them to balance what is not balanced, whether that's a certain quality of performance, muscle tone, blood pressure, coordination, literal balance, standing on one leg, that kind of thing. I'm always trying to figure out like where's the imbalance? What's the imbalance? So it's very normal to have some level of imbalance. There's no question about it. The problem is when things become too out of balance. I think that's when we start to see issues come up. So like we were saying at the beginning of this episode, a lot of times the goal is to activate. And sometimes we have to call in these inhibition tools because we need to downregulate or inhibit other things so that we can direct more activation to where we want it to go without the interference of dominance coming from somewhere else. Okay, so let's say we're going to pattern the client as a left cerebellar deficit, which typically is going to go with a right, let's just say frontal lobe deficit. And maybe we do some neuro assessing and we find coordination issues on the left side of the body. Maybe we do some visual saccades and we find some frontal lobe difficulties with visual saccades. And maybe history also gives us some clues like attention issues, focus issues, executive function issues, stuff like that. So now what we're looking at here is a left cerebellar deficit and a right cortical deficit. Okay. So first line tools might be activate the left cerebellum. Okay. Because that's going to directly begin to also activate the right cortex. Okay. Mm-hmm. We might also activate the right cortex, and that's going to help the left cerebellum. It's always a two-way street. So we're looking for inputs that are going to do that for us, and we're assessing and reassessing as we go to see which ones are doing that. That strategy works great, but sometimes if a person has such an imbalance, we then might say, okay, this is okay, but we're not getting the result we think we could. Let's go and inhibit the other side of the brain. So now we might go to some of our inhibition tools and target them at the left hemisphere. And that's why we might call on some of these specific tools for the visual system, because by messing with the visual field, we can have a really big influence on what we want to upregulate or downregulate. Okay, so back to patching the eye. When you cover one eye, it's not perfect because the way the visual streams work is, let's say I cover my right eye. My left eye is going to send light information to both my right cortex and my left cortex. Mm-hmm. But there will be some level of inhibition. So sometimes covering one eye can make a very big difference for somebody, and it can be used as a inhibition tool, no question. And for our listeners at home, you're listening to this, you could literally try it. You can cover one eye. Make sure you test something first, like range of motion or balance. Cover one eye for 20 seconds or so, walk around your house with your eye covered, and then do some retesting and see how you respond to covering each eye. Mm-hmm. You might find that covering one eye really helps your performance or your assessment in some way. And yeah, that can be a tool. Now, I'm not saying wear an eye patch all day long, but I am saying by covering one eye, it might actually be something you could combine with some other basic mobility drills for a couple minutes at a time. And you might find that when you do that combination of drills, your pain is less or your mobility improves. So it's a tool, right? Yeah. It's a tool.
And it sounds like in this situation, it's about targeting. So you're trying to get one side of the cerebellum to activate, but the other side is doing more of the work. So you're removing inputs from the other side to give that first side a chance to do its job.
Exactly. Yeah, that is one way to look at it. And there might be instances where you might even try to use your inhibition tools and target them at, let's say, the cortex that you're targeting. Mm-hmm. But just kind of first line thought is, let's inhibit the other side to, like you said, give the targets more of a chance to do their job. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And you can get some really interesting changes in performance right away doing that. Now, like we were saying, the visual system, just messing with it, you can do a lot of things with it. We talked about pinholes, eye patch. Here's a neat one. There's a tool called Hemifield glasses. Okay. This is probably the coolest one in my opinion. Well, tied with color. We'll talk about color. They're all cool. They're all cool. We'll talk about color lenses too. And by the way, these are inexpensive things. You can buy pinhole glasses on Amazon if you wanted to play with them. You're probably going to spend $10. I'll explain how to make your own Hemifield glasses here in a few minutes. So this tool called a Hemifield glass, something you see more in like the functional neurology world. Very rarely do you see this in like a fitness or sport performance context, but man, it belongs there. Trust me, this is really cool. So imagine glasses that have been altered so that if you were, let's say you were to draw a vertical line down the center of each lens so that you had a right and a left half to each lens. The way these are designed is, if you can imagine, if I put glasses on with this dividing line down each lens, so the right side of the glass on my right eye might be blue, and the left side of the right eye might be green. Okay. And then on the left eye, the inside of it, closest to my nose, might be blue, and the outside might be green. Okay. So you got this combination of color going on. And it's interesting because when you put them on, it's not as weird as you might think. Your brain is really good at taking what it sees and essentially creating an illusion, if you will. I don't know what it's really. The visual system works really well. It can take confusing things and make clear things out of them. That's why the human visual system is so bizarre. Right? I'm sure everyone's looked at some kind of illusion before. It's like, what? How did I come to that? Like, with what? How am I seeing that? But my friend is seeing something different. Right? The visual system's wild. So these Hemifield glasses are interesting because this is a way to do exactly what we were discussing, where we might want to upregulate one side of the brain and downregulate another. And we can do that with color. And because of the way the visual streams work, this would be very difficult for me to explain in a podcast. This won't be super precise, but the way the visual streams work, and what I mean is light information entering both eyes, that information crosses. Right? It crosses, but I don't mean it crosses like all the light information from the left eye goes to the right cortex. It's actually split. So the left eye is going to deliver information to the right cortex and the left cortex, but it has to do more with the part of the visual field that we're talking about.
And so some parts go...
Exactly.
That makes sense, though, because if you're trying to merge two images, you might favor the inside of the right eye going to the left side, for example. I don't know if that's exactly how that works.
Well, it's close. Yeah, it's close. And it also kind of makes sense from a survival perspective, too, because like our nervous system is full of redundant systems. And I think a big part of that is so that if one system fails or gets horribly injured, other things can pick up the slack and help us compensate. So there's a lot of things like that in neuroanatomy. But to give the listeners an idea, so a really simple way to think about it is all of the light information that I would be sensing or seeing from the outside of the visual field, okay, is going to go to the opposite cortex. Okay, so if I'm picking up on information on the outside of my left field, that's going to be a right brain activation. Okay. And then if I go over to the other eye, the stuff that I see closer to the midline, like in the nasal area, is going to go to the contralateral cortex. And of course, we could flip that and say the same thing about the other eye. So if you know your visual fields, you can manipulate them a little bit in training to drive more activation or less activation to one side of the brain. So the way these hemifields work is when it comes to color, for example, I think I said blue and green. Yeah. So when it comes to color, and this might be you see these in all different colors, but generally what seems to be agreed on right now is that blue is the most activating color for the cortex. So it would make sense that we would put the blue half of those hemifields in the part of the visual fields that go to the contralateral cortex. Let's just say it like this. Like I said, this gets a little confusing. It's way easier with a diagram, but the blue part of the lenses, okay, that part of the visual field that you're sensing, because of where the lenses are positioned with hemifields, the activation part is going to be skewed towards the same side, right? The part of the cortex that you want to upregulate and activate.
Yeah.
The green part is going to be more inhibiting, you would say. That it's not that like it turns stuff off, it's just not as strong.
Yeah.
Okay, because green is thought to be like a bit more inhibiting. Green is interesting. It can be quite good for like pain inhibition. Generally is a bit calmer, gives good calming responses for people. People's responses to color still is very individual, but generally speaking, we do know some information about color, blue being the most upregulating for the cortex. Red is also very activating. So blue and red seems to be the most activating. That's what's agreed on. It's possible that red is a bit more activating for the sympathetics. Blue's a bit more activating for the cortex. Also usable tools in the work that we do, depending on what you want to activate. But you can create hemifields with different colors and customize them. You can buy them, already built with certain colors. It's sometimes a tool that's used in different forms of visual therapies. But a lot of people make their own because you can explore the colors and get some really cool responses. This is something that really helped me once, I think, early on. It's like 7 years ago. I've talked about it before on the podcast. I had a back injury. Looking back on it now, it was probably a disc thing, and I called it a sciatic nerve injury. Something happened there, and it was nasty, and I kind of was like at a point where I could not find any entry-level like tools that would help me start the process of rehabbing because it was so sensitive. It's funny. So like, a brain trying to diagnose itself never goes well. So like, I'm like racking my brain trying to figure out what do I need? And I'm not really finding a whole lot. And I'm in a very sensitive state. We had one of our really good friends visiting for about 5 days from New York City who started out as a colleague, became a really good friend. We took a lot of applied neurology courses together. He was just up visiting. And he's like, you know what? We should try some stuff. And I'm like, all right, well, what do you want to try? I've tried everything. Like I said it, like I said what I always hear people say to me. Tried everything. Nothing works. Like, what do you, like, okay. And he's like, have you tried Hemifield glasses? I was like, no. It's like, okay. So we made some Hemifields and we did not have the bi-color Hemifield. So we made our own. And you can do this. And for our listeners want to run a little nerdy experiment at home, you can do this. This is really easy to do. So you can take really any pair of glasses you have, ideally clear ones, but you could use color. That you absolutely could use color. And what you would do is take probably 2 pieces of black electrical tape or something similar, and you look at the lenses, and you're going to block half of the visual field. So just put one on the outside on one lens and put one on the inside on the other lens. And then you can do some assess, reassess, like we always talk about, and then put the glasses on and see how that changes, your performance and your assessments. And then you can switch the tape over to the other side, kind of experiment with that, because remember you're going to be upregulating one side of the brain, downregulating the other. So you could just play and switch the tape and see how that affects you. That's what we did with my friend and Mikhail. And we got it set up properly for me. And I was like, son of a gun. I was like, I'm walking better. I feel less tension. And I actually ended up using those Hemifields as an entry point into the first exercise that started helping me, which is the famous reverse hyperextension. If you've ever seen that, which can be a useful drill for spinal cord rehabilitation after sciatic issues, disc issues. I'm not going to say it's perfect for everyone, but it was a good drill for me. And before I did the Hemifields, I was not able to do it pain-free, and I was not getting results. With the Hemifields, I now had less tension, less neural tension, less pain overall, and I was able to start.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool.
That's crazy. That's so cool. Yeah, rest in peace, Louis Simmons, right?
Yeah.
I think he's responsible for that particular tool.
I believe so.
Do you have any other visual tools you want to touch on? Maybe color?
Yeah, so I pretty much covered color with blue. So blue being the most activating, possibly a little bit inhibiting for the midbrain. Red also being quite activating, maybe more for the midbrain. Green, more inhibiting, possibly useful for pain. And yellow is kind of a color that's used a lot for contrast sensitivity, as well as sometimes people just describe it being kind of a calming type color. And there are other colors. I mean, I've seen people explore pink lenses, violet lenses. Those are also popular ones. And here's the idea behind this. You know, you can use the glasses to either activate or inhibit, and you assess and you reassess just like we always do. And the whole idea is you're looking for a tool that can help you with your goal. Like my little story there about my back, I used the Hemifields to help decrease pain, right? And decrease the tension I was feeling. And that gave me an entry point into better training and gave me some momentum. Mm-hmm. That's what you'd be doing with color lenses too. And you can buy them very cheap, $10 a pair. I usually tell people to start with exactly what I mentioned there: blue, red, green, yellow. If I wasn't to do that, I'd probably recommend blue, red, green, and some kind of like violet or violet or a pink, right? Those are usually the ones that are pretty interesting for people. So really neat tools there.
And you're just doing what you would do with any other stimulus. You do a drill, then you put on the filters, right? And then you do it again and you assess what the difference is.
Yeah, it could be, for our listeners who are, involved in our courses and stuff, right? It could be that you use the lenses to help cerebellar function. So you are testing your cerebellar, you're using your cerebellar assessments, putting the lenses on, retesting. Mm-hmm. It could be that you want to use the lenses to help improve gait. So you look at your client's gait, have them put the lenses on, now watch them walk with the lenses on, right? And you're looking for changes in the quality of movement. It could be that you're looking for something to help a chronic pain client. So you have them assess their chronic pain, right? Scale it 1 to 10. Maybe if it's a specific movement, scale that. If it's, however you want to do it, then put the glasses on, whether it's pinholes, color, Hemifields, retest what happened, right? That's literally that simple. And it's just it's a really fast thing too, because this is like a passive tool, right? So it's like, here, try these on. And it's wild. It's absolutely wild what can happen with this.
Shifting senses a little bit.
Yeah.
In some of our previous episodes, you've talked about auditory stimulus, where you've, had someone put in one earbud on one side and listen to music or listen to a tone or something.
Yeah.
And that's been extremely helpful for them. It got me thinking, would you ever put in like an earplug on one side to inhibit input from that side of the side of the brain?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. It's honestly, the earplug's probably the one I use the most right now.
Oh, really?
Because most of it's so simple, right? Because in most of my calls are my one-on-ones that I do with our students and stuff, they're on Zoom, right? And so part of the challenge with that is like, I don't have all my tools, in their hands at that point. So I always have to get creative and have them use things that they already have around their home, especially if it's someone I haven't worked with before. I'm not going to have them invest in all this stuff early on. It's, an investment here and there as we go is typical. But an earplug is easy, right? Because a lot of people have them. And if you don't, you can make one, real simple. And so, there's plenty of instances where we might use an earplug. And by plugging one ear and decreasing auditory stimulus, you are going to have both an activation effect of that, but also an inhibition effect of that. Sound, we generally look at as split kind of 60-40 in terms of, like, think about it as the sound that enters my right ear eventually is going to end up in the opposite cortex as far as processing goes. So if I use sound stimulus that enters my right ear, some of that is going to stay ipsilateral and activate the brainstem via cranial nerve 8. That's your vestibulocochlear nerve. And the other portion of that is going to go to the opposite cortex. So it's split like that. So that means I could put an earplug in someone's left ear to create inhibition of their right cortex. Then I could give them sound stimulus in the right ear to upregulate the left cortex. Right? So that's absolutely a possibility. And man, this one works really good.
Yeah.
It works really good.
That's the most surprising for me. I don't know why.
I use it. I use like sound stimulus a lot as an input directed at the brainstem. I think I told a story. I forget which podcast it was. It was earlier. I guess it was last year. I was working with someone one-on-one, and they had spinal cord fusion, lots of tough surgeries, bilateral hip replacement, spinal cord fusion. Their goal was to jump, like hop again on their left leg. And we tried some stuff. Little results here and there, but nothing amazing. Finally, we had her plug one ear and put sound stimulus in the other. She went from not being able to jump once to being able to do like 35 hops on one leg.
Yeah.
Just from the sound stimulus. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was wild. So that's often how I use it, is I'll direct the sound stimulus towards the brainstem, towards the opposite cortex, and you are getting some inhibition as well. And it's a very big change in input, which might be why it can be such a intense change, right, with output.
So, I didn't catch when you told that story the first time that not only did you put a stimulus on one side, that you actually put an earplug on the other side.
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't have to do it that way, but I often will do it that way.
Yeah. Because it can help magnify the asymmetric effect of it.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And actually, I'm using sound stimulus myself right now. I talked about, it might have been the last podcast or the one before, recent, where I've been doing some neuro drills at night to help my hamstrings. One of my highest payoff drills right now is sound stimulus in my left ear, and I have an earplug in my right ear. So I'm doing sound stimulus in my left ear, and at the same time, I'm doing some biasing, some left-sided activation into my vestibular system. And this is because my left hamstring is my problematic one. And this has been super effective. Super effective. And all I do is play music. So I put on a little music. I can hear it kind of in the distance. Sometimes I'll put it up to my ear, make it a little bit more intense. And I'll do the other exercises at the same time. So I'm stimulating vestibulocochlear nerve, which is cranial nerve 8, which is involved in vestibular processing. So this is a form of stacking using sound stimulus, combining it with the vestibular system. Really, really neat stuff happens when you start combining these things, because remember, a lot of the times we're not just using these tools by themselves.
Right.
That's what makes the work so unique, and that's kind of the craft of being an applied neuro person. We might put pinhole glasses on you, but you're doing other things.
Yeah.
Right? We might put Hemifields on you, and now we have you doing motor control work on a specific side. We might have Hemifields on you, and we're delivering sound stimulus to a very specific side. Right? There's a lot of things you might do to make the stimulus stronger.
Yeah. I mean, this reminds me of you call it the table dilemma.
Yeah.
Where you could do something therapeutic, but if you're not actually doing that therapeutic thing while doing the movement that's causing the pain, or doing the, activity that you're having issue with, maybe it's not as effective. So these are things that you want to do while you're practicing your movement, if that's the goal, or while you're trying to rehabilitate pain or something.
Exactly. Yeah. We're always trying to combine things. We're always trying to make things as active as possible. We have passive tools. We're discussing a lot of those passive tools. We will want to combine them with active tools, right, for the most learning. But that whole table dilemma thing is interesting, because we were just making the case for how strong of an influence visual input has over the entire nervous system. That's part of the reason why the table dilemma exists. So for those who have not heard this yet, we talked about it in a prior episode. I think we were talking about the neurology of manual therapy and how so much of it is done laying on a table, right? And I get that, right? Person's relaxed, you don't have to fight as much of the tension as you're doing manual work. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, that is necessary, and that is a good first line tool to help get a result that then leads you somewhere else. But what we often see with any therapeutic intervention done on a table where your relationship to gravity is now completely different because you're laying down, is that when you stand up, guess what? Your eyes take in the most visual input. And if you have any kind of existing visual issue, imbalance, maybe even vestibular, your tone is completely recalibrated based on those things because they are higher priority as far as your brain is concerned, because they are some of your most important survival senses. So you might have a hamstring that is super tight, chronically tight, hurts all the time, and someone massages that tension out of your hamstring. It feels great. You stand up, you walk around a little bit, and you're like, wow, this is nice. Like, this is how I want my hamstring to feel. And then, you pay for your session and walk out the door, and you get to your car, and you get in the car and start it up, and you go, oh no, it's coming back. Right? This is literally a phenomenon known in the therapeutic world as parking lot syndrome.
Yeah.
Where results wear off. And a lot of times when that happens, it's because your higher order senses run the show. So anything that you do on the body, once it's reintegrated with other parts of the sensory system, sometimes those results can be lost, which is a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
But it makes us need to think more about the specificity of what we're doing and the integration of some of these higher order senses into the work that we're doing. Because manual therapy is very powerful. We just need to figure out how to use it more specifically.
Absolutely. So we've been talking a lot about actually taking away whole sensations, right? An entire eye is covered, or taking away entire parts of the color spectrum, or taking away hearing on one side. I have a little bit of tinnitus. I think everybody in my field that's worked in music and venues and whatnot has it. And so I really enjoy white noise when I go to sleep. I really enjoy just a little bit of background noise, because that tiny little high-pitched whir that exists in my brain is less obvious. So I'm wondering if there's other things like that, like where it's inhibiting by adding something that's maybe distracting your senses as opposed to taking them away completely.
Yeah. When you have kids, I'm going to come back and ask you about this because I think I've been traumatized by white noise.
Oh.
When my daughter was first born and we had her next to our bed, and it was all about like teaching her how to sleep, and there wasn't much sleep going on for anybody. And we had the white noise machine going. Oh my gosh, dude.
So you associate it with just like no sleep torture.
Yes, that's no sleep torture for me. And what I think I started out being like, oh, this is nice. I can like set it to the babbling brook, and I'll go to sleep feeling like I'm going on a fly fishing trip tomorrow. And then it turned into like this like traumatized, like, oh my gosh, I've been a zombie for several years. Get that white noise. I think I was so happy to put the white noise machine away.
It's deep in your temporal lobe.
Yes, it is. It is. Get me back on track there. You wanted to know about,
Yeah. So for example, I did a quick Google search just in preparation for this episode. And I was like, all right, what are some like neurological inhibition tools? And a lot of stuff came up that was like way more clinical, right? But I was just glancing at it. And one of the things I saw was like, well, you can actually inhibit nerves locally with electromagnetic stimulation. At least that's what some of these websites were talking about. A lot of it was over my head, so I didn't go that deep into it. But it just kind of made me wonder, like, okay, if we're applying a local stimulus and it's actually inhibiting as opposed to activating, like what's going on there? And then I was just curious if you have tools like that, if there's anything that you use that you would actually, upon thinking about it, like think, oh, this is actually an inhibition tool and not an activation tool. But I'm fishing here. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
see if there's anything there.
Well, you know what? We didn't actually get a chance to mention this part yet. We talked about earplugs, but just so people know, made me think of this. One of the common things that's used in more of a clinical environment when somebody's rehabbing after having had a concussion, because when people have a concussion, one of the common symptoms is that they become very light and sound sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sometimes what people will do in that state is use earplugs in both ears to downregulate sensory information coming in from, the auditory sense. And that can be very calming for somebody. You can also do that with sunglasses. I think I kind of mentioned that very briefly earlier on. So post-concussion, it might be common for someone to wear sunglasses and earplugs when they're inside for a given amount of time to help down-regulate that upregulated sympathetic activity post-concussion.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be very effective, very effective. You also made me think about an interesting one. And this is not something I wouldn't call this a first-line tool, but one of the things I've become very fond of over the years is something called motor points. And a motor point is a location on the body, a location on a muscle where the nerve supply to that muscle is most accessible to the skin. Mm-hmm. Some people would say, oh, that sounds like an acupuncture point. Mm-hmm. And that's true. It's just like an acupuncture point, except not all acupuncture points are motor points. Not all motor points are acupuncture points. But if you've never felt, like, acupuncture is this thing that if you don't know a lot about it, people see it and they're like, what? Like, you see an acupuncturist will feel. By feel, they will find points on the body. And they'll do it quickly because they're good at it and they've had a lot of practice with it. And if you were to watch this and you don't know anything about acupuncture, you'd say, this is BS. They are actually feeling a very specific point on the body. And you can get trained to feel it. And it's not hard, actually. But you do need a lot of hours in doing this. Sort of. I laugh because my wife, Alicia, is an acupuncturist. And the amount of hours that she has, doing feeling points and stuff is wild compared to me. And she's always laughing because, like, I behave like I know how to do acupuncture, and she thinks that's funny, but I don't. But I know a lot about motor points, right? And so we just kind of have fun with this. But you can feel these points, and by putting your hand on the body, and oftentimes you just kind of slide the hand down the body, and what will happen is you'll fall into a very subtle depression that you can feel. Now, with a motor point, we know where motor points are, so we can kind of look at a map for that. And if our listeners wanted to Google this up, you could just Google up map of motor points, and you'll get several different things, but it gives you a general idea of where the motor points are for each muscle. And if you locate those motor points, as I said, that is an area where the nerve supply is pretty close to the skin. Dude, this is crazy, the effect you can have on somebody with motor points. So you could touch one of these points, and you could twist your finger a little bit counterclockwise. And all it does is stretch the skin a little bit. It's almost not even noticeable. And you could take someone's pain from a 7 to a 0, or they had a mobility restriction and now they don't. Crazy effective. Very, very interesting tool. You could twist it clockwise, get a different result. You could twist counterclockwise, get exactly the result you want. You could twist the other way and get exactly the result you didn't want. It's really wild. One of the things, going back to your original question with, like, inhibition. So I don't know if this is completely agreed upon. So I've tried it and I've had a lot of experience where people test a little bit differently, like everything else, but tapping on the motor point repetitively. So tap, 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 tap. The tempo probably matters. You can explore it. That is a way to possibly create some very localized inhibition. So let's say you have a muscle that's like too tight, it's behaving in a way you don't want it to, there's pain involved, it's causing a movement issue, tap, 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 tap. Now it might be gone. I mean, it's an interesting tool. Again, I don't use it as much these days as I'm doing a lot of, right now I'm not doing a lot of privates, but when I do, we're on Zoom, right? And so Motor Points has just kind of been one of those tools that have kind of moved to the back of the toolbox, if you know what I mean. But it's something that is really, really neat. So all that is to say, what you do with tactile sensory stuff, right? Techniques, because I'm sure there's many more. I'm sure people are going to listen to this podcast who are experienced in different techniques manually and stuff, and they're maybe thinking of a technique they know of that is quite a good inhibition tool, you know? So all that's to say that we can actually have an effect with inhibition, maybe more so locally with what I'm describing, although there will be higher order.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. Yeah. So it's cool. There's definitely a lot, and still a lot I don't know about.
Yeah. Another avenue I was thinking about was with interoception, right?
Oh yeah, thanks for mentioning that, because I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so maybe I'll give my thought and you can take it and run with it. But I was thinking about the people that they're doing a squat or something and they're thinking too much about where their knees are and how their knees tracking, whether it's over their toes or they're thinking about the body. They're trying to activate their glute by thinking about the glute. And what a lot of coaches, I think, have discovered is if you give external cues, that can be really helpful in improving quality of movement if they're the right external cues, right? So instead of thinking about what you're doing with your body, you're thinking about, hey, look over here while you do this, right?
Yep.
For example. And that just got me thinking, can external cueing help with inhibiting interoception? If someone's feeling pain when they're doing a movement, can you direct their attention outwards as an inhibition tool?
Totally, dude. I'm really impressed with what you have learned in a short time, man. It's really cool.
Oh, thanks,
like we said from the beginning, your brain works for this stuff because you've got the engineer mindset. So, yeah, the insula. This is a very important one because the insula is where we see that some people get overactive, if you want to say it like that. So an example of having kind of an overactive insula would be being hyper aware of your body. So like you said, it's a good example. Someone can be hyper aware of their glutes, right? And they're focusing too much on internal input, right? Feeling that body part, right? Really directing their attention inward instead of outward. What we know is that when you direct your attention inward, you actually increase the amount of tension that is generated. Now, some might say, oh, that sounds like a good thing if you're working your glutes. Well, maybe, but maybe not. It depends on the context. So if you're working with somebody that does not have good proprioceptive awareness, and you need them to have better proprioceptive awareness, it might make sense to give them some internal cueing because they're not feeling their body the way that we might want them to. But somebody who is already kind of overactive in that sense, where they've learned to pay too much attention or direct too much of their attention inward, that might be exactly the wrong thing. And it can work against you because increasing tension internally can actually, well, what do we know about tension? It's the enemy of efficiency. I mean, when we look at great athletes, and they all have the same thing in common, right? They all make hard things look easy. They do really hard things, and they have no expression on their face. Sometimes they're smiling, right? And it's really interesting how efficient they've learned to become. They also generally have great, exteroception, eyes, ears, right? All that stuff. So it can work against you to be too internal with basic movement. We got to know this about people, right? As a coach, like I'm always teaching our students how to pick up on whether or not a person might have some insular challenges. We can learn that in their history and also their assessments. Believe it or not, with the insula, it can become so upregulated that people can be super hyper aware of their internal body. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about being over aware of their own heartbeat, over aware of their own breathing. So this goes beyond just being like the person that's over aware of their glutes, right? And it can be very distracting. And these folks do better when you start teaching them how to direct more attention outward. An overactive insula makes a lot of styles of training very difficult, particularly breathing. If you teach someone with an overactive insula how to do breathing exercises, sometimes they'll tell you that, oh, that increased my anxiety, right? And so breathing is, like that kind of slow, controlled, internal focus style of breathing might not actually be the right fit for somebody that has an overactive insula. So like you were saying, directing their attention outward with different cues, that's a great way to go. Sometimes we might use some of our tools such as a metronome, right? With basic movement, timing to a metronome. It can be a visual metronome too, with like a flashing light, right? This really helps keep our attention outward. We have other things we like to do, coordination charts, different styles of hand-eye coordination. These are all really useful things. And when it comes to an overactive insula, we have to have ways to inhibit it. And one of the ways that we might have success with that is by offering the person a lot of frontal lobe stimulus. It can be really, really useful. So frontal lobe drills, well, using some of those tools I just mentioned fall into that category. So does like visual saccades is a good frontal lobe stimulus. There's a lot of different things. Some of the tools we already discussed, like colored lenses. I mean, you could put blue lenses on, right? Upregulate the frontal lobe and maybe see a benefit to that with somebody who has an overactive insula, right? So we're picking our tools strategically based on what we think might be going on. And that insula example is a really good one because you hear that a lot from people. They struggle with being over aware of their internal body. Like, pelvic floor is a big one. People become hyper aware of their pelvic floor, their glutes, their core, their breathing. And of course this goes the other way too. You can see that people have no awareness of those things. So opposite type of issue there.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot one.
Yeah, let's
I'm just looking at my list here. This is a really interesting one to mention too, as an inhibition tool. Visualizing rather than performing. So
interesting.
Yeah. Although visualization still does activate the cerebellum, like that's pretty wild actually. That's why when I say this, people think I'm crazy. And then we assess it on some of our early mobility challenges that we did. I used this because we had a lot of people coming into our mobility challenges that were in pain. And hey, when you're in pain, sometimes you can't do targeted movement. So I taught them that they could use visualization as an entry point to movement to get the process started. And in a certain situation with chronic pain or something, it can be very effective. Your cerebellum and some of the motor pathways are still activated with visualization, which is so wild. Cool. So it's not like total inhibition, but because your eyes are closed and you're not actually moving, it's a less of a strong stimulus. And so you could actually visualize. And I will do this when somebody has, let's say, vestibular. Sometimes when people have vision and vestibular threats, they need the vision and vestibular work. But when you deliver it to them, they're very sensitive to it. And it kind of, tips the threat bucket over, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Sometimes closing your eyes and visualizing it, which seems so silly, like to have someone close their eyes, but do a vision drill or close their eyes and do a vestibular drill. That sometimes can be the perfect starting point for someone, and you can do the same thing with basic movement. It's really neat.
Yeah, because I guess if it's still activating the same brain areas, right?
Yep.
It's almost just like a smaller dosage of the actual thing.
Exactly.
That's
exactly
really
right.
cool.
Yeah. And I've used it with clients with excellent success. Like, hey, your homework drill is, hey, that knee circle that we started practicing, but you run into pain when the range of motion gets too big. We don't want to move you into pain. That doesn't make sense. So, do these other things that went well, but let's spend a week, in each time you do your homework drills, take like a minute to visualize yourself doing a perfect knee circle with no pain. And when you do that, visualizing, as if you're in your body, viewing things through the lens of your own eyes, performing the movement. But here's the important part, and this is so weird because it's hard for some people to do. You need to be able to visualize without taking your dysfunctions with you. For chronic pain people, believe it or not, this is actually very hard.
Yeah.
If you've been in chronic pain for a long time.
Because they're visualizing the pain.
That's
they're
right.
used to it. It's associated with the movement.
Yeah. Whereas like an athlete that maybe has been injured, they know what it's like to move their body without that pain and injury. And so they have an easier time usually visualizing it and kind of getting their technique the way they want it to be. Whereas someone else who's been in chronic pain for a while might struggle with that. So that's the practice, is you have to be able to visualize it without bringing your dysfunctions with you. Yeah, it's an interesting tool that can be quite useful early on in the rehab stages, if you know what I mean. And of course, we know that people who get good at visualization, athletes, right, it's a very powerful tool for improving performance.
Yeah, I know some powerlifter types will advocate for visualizing the entire process of like the PR rep, like
definitely
standing up, getting to the bar, bending over, gripping it, aligning your back, like, you know what I mean? Like they'll actually go through it mentally first before they do it. And some people say that that's really helpful. Has that been your experience with training? Have you ever used it for like strength performance, for example?
I used it during my wrestling career religiously, and I didn't know it was a good thing. I just did this naturally. It felt right. It felt like that was what I had to do, because the reason I started using it is because I was injured. And I was very focused on my wrestling practice. And I was always nervous about taking too much time away from wrestling. Like, would I lose technique that I had gained? And so naturally, I just fell into the routine of doing, just visualization where I was drilling my techniques. And I do remember how I got better at visualizing that. And I always found that even if I had taken several weeks off from practicing, when I would go back, it was as if I didn't lose anything. And sometimes I was better, which I always found fascinating. And so I took that with me into coaching high school wrestling and actually taught our athletes how to visualize. And we used to spend some time doing that in the practice room, especially in the postseason. And I would combine it with some of the physical things we were doing. So part of the drill set we were working on would have, let's say, a minute or 2 minutes of actual visualization of the match that they were in. But then that would come to an end and we'd do something physical. So we were stacking. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew it looked like it was effective for these kids, and they gave me feedback and they enjoyed it. And I knew it helped me. So we experimented. And so in the postseason, visualization with physical practice, combining the two, and it always had nice energy to it. And people, you could see in their performance that it was useful. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Well, this is fascinating. I think understanding the concept of overactivity that you brought up at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
And that sometimes taking things away is actually the step forward, as opposed to hammering more and more stimulus on something.
Definitely.
Which is kind of the urge, right? It's like, let me apply a fix to this,
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, for folks listening, just to kind of summarize, play around with some of this stuff. Certainly you can go and make your own pinholes or even buy them for cheap, but you can make them. Take a piece of paper and make some glasses like you made in, kindergarten out of paper, and then poke a bunch of holes in them with a pin, like a bunch. And you'll make your own pinholes, and when you put them on, it will do the same thing. Play with that, see how you respond to that with movement, with pain. You can even explore, we talked about just covering one eye. We talked about making your own Hemifield glasses with some clear glasses, colored glasses if you have them, but you can take black electrical tape and you can occlude those different parts of the visual field that I described. One on the outside of one eye, one on the inside of the other eye. And then you do some movement, assess it, see how you respond, and then switch it to the other side. Just have a little experiment going, and you might find that you respond very good to one of these types of inhibition training tools. And man, if you do, let me know, because I always love hearing about people's success. And those of you who are starting to, from this new group who are starting to go through our courses and get into the material, if you make any good discoveries using the podcast, let us know, and I'll bridge you into how you can use those tools more effectively with what you're learning in the material that we're teaching.
Yeah, awesome.
All right, there it is. Some ideas on inhibition. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hey, listen, if you want to get more involved in this kind of work and you're just now starting to get into listening to the podcast, make sure that you have seen my free Neuro Masterclass. You can find that using the link in the description. You can also find it over on Instagram and YouTube. Make sure to watch that, because that is really the foundational starting point for learning some of the basic assessment processes that we teach everybody. Once you understand how to use that assessment process, you're going to be able to view our free content in a completely new way. You're going to be able to assess your body's response to any of the exercises that you're learning through our content. So that is super critical for you. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back soon.